Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the council workshop for Monday, November 22nd at 7 o'clock. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Do you have any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda?
Very well.
Moved by Councillor Curran. Is there a seconder on the matter? Need a second, Councillor Bond. Okay, call the question on the matter. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Okay, we have a set of minutes, actually two sets of minutes from April 19th council workshop and June 28th council workshop that have been circulated. Are there any errors or omissions from the minutes as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Curran. Call the question on the matter. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries.
Councillor Curran, your dog has joined you. I just wanted to let you know that.
Okay.
I don't know. It could get loud.
I just wanted to let you know. That's all. I saw him creeping up through the door. So.
That's a big dog. All right. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome tonight. The purpose of tonight's workshop is to discuss potential changes to the tree protection policy. This matter came before the council, I believe, back in June, and the council decided to refer the matter back to staff to get some ideas on how we could amend or update the tree protection policy. And so it was referred to staff, and staff have returned it to this workshop for discussion. And so I'm going to turn over to Mr. Milburn to introduce the topic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council. As you stated, earlier this year, council passed a motion specifically directing staff to report back on possible amendments to the tree protection bylaw and fees and charges bylaw at a council workshop, and the establishment of an urban forest management strategy, and report back following that council workshop on recommendations to update the tree protection bylaw. So staff subsequently prepared the materials included in tonight's agenda, and Mr. Richard Bowes, is Section Manager of Environmental Sustainability Operations, is available to provide an overview of those materials and answer questions of council. Now, other staff are also with us tonight that could answer related questions, such as Ms. Stephanie Warner, Manager of Parks. Thank you, Worship. And Mr. Bowes is now available and ready to provide his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Bowes.
Good evening, members of council and my virtual colleagues. I hope everyone's well tonight. I will share my screen and we can get underway. Okay. So we're going to talk briefly with the slides I have presented around some ideas staff have come up with in terms of changes we can make to our current policy around the protection of trees. And that's what I'm here tonight to discuss. So we will talk briefly about the tree protection bylaw, a very, very quick overview. We will then talk a little bit more detailed in terms of the kinds of changes we're proposing currently. We will talk about the first year of our urban tree canopy program and some ideas for some other tree-related initiatives. And then we've got a very brief discussion, as there was a question from one or more councillors regarding the planting of trees along district boulevards. Then we'll have time for a discussion, and then we would close and hopefully get some further direction from council in terms of where to proceed. The Community Charter does confer the authority to local governments to regulate trees as well as other environmental features associated with the land. However, our ability to regulate trees, in particular on private property, is not without limitations. We cannot prevent the permitted uses or impact the permitted density of land under its current zoning. And what this means is where we have policy that is perceived to be in conflict, for example, our zoning bylaw and the tree protection bylaw, it is very, very difficult to force the protection of trees on property that come into conflict with our other policy. As the bottom note says, if we chose to do so, it was very likely that we would need to provide compensation to the owner or provide other means to an owner for achieving the permitted use and density on that land, in addition to protecting certain trees. So it is a very complex and multifaceted problem, protecting trees on private property. Our original tree bylaw was adopted in 1993. Our current version that staff and the community are working with was revised in 2012 after a fairly lengthy review that included all kinds of public dialogue and workshops across the entire district. The current version of our tree protection bylaw is a foundational piece of our other corporate and strategic long-range plans. A couple of examples are our official community plan, in particular the Streamside Protection Development Permit Area and our Natural Environment Development Permit Area, are all designed to be complementary with the policy associated with the tree protection bylaw. Newer strategic plans, such as our climate change adaptation strategy and our community energy and emissions plans, all speak to long-range goals of promoting, preserving, and actually encouraging the growth of our urban tree canopy and the associated biodiversity. And this is for the natural ecosystem services that are inherent when we promote a thriving urban tree canopy and biodiversity within our bounds. The statement down below is taken directly from the bylaw and the OCP, and it speaks to the history in terms of the bylaw and what it was intended. The current version of the tree bylaw protects trees on sloping terrain, trees in stream side protection corridors, streams in wetlands or adjacent to wetlands, and trees on the waterfront. The tree protection bylaw also protects district-owned trees, trees on private property that are within restricted covenant areas. And the 2012 amendment to the bylaw introduced a new category of protected tree called the large diameter tree. And that's a privately owned tree, and we'll be speaking more about that at length later on. Replacement trees, as in trees that are required to be replanted under permit issued pursuant to the bylaw. We protect certain specific rare species that are native to our region. Wildlife trees that provide habitats and biodiversity features for other wildlife. And heritage trees. Council has a schedule to the tree protection bylaw that lists very specific trees in specific locations and affords them what amounts to the highest protection available under local government process. Under our tree protection bylaw, we require a permit to be issued when work or removal is contemplated for protected trees. Generally speaking, a protected tree must be a tree that is greater than 10 centimeters in diameter, measured at 1.3 meters above grade. Protected trees can be on public and private property. We've developed an online application form that is fairly straightforward, and the community's been using this successfully for the last 2 or 3 years. Arborist reports are normally required, but not always. And arborist reports are required generally to assure ISA pruning standards, to clarify the degree of hazard presented by a tree, and other kinds of things like that. Replacement trees, again, are generally required, but there is staff direction in terms of when replacement trees are required, how many. Most of council is likely aware, but when we issue a permit for the removal of a hazard tree, there is no permit fee associated with that, and nor do we normally require replacement trees. When there is when there is replacement trees required, staff have a operational process where we will take 125% of the costs associated with procuring the replacement trees and getting them in the ground. And that security is returned after staff complete an on-site inspection and confirm the replacement trees have been duly installed. So large diameter trees, as I mentioned, this was a new category introduced in 2012. A large diameter tree is a large tree that measures at least 0.75 meters or 75 centimeters, measured at the same 1.3 meters above surrounding grade. A large diameter tree is solely a tree resting on private property, and it is not otherwise or also a protected tree. And what we mean by that is it's not a large tree that's in a sloping terrain component in a streamside protection area, a restricted covenant, or any of those other categories that I mentioned in a previous slide. A large diameter tree is solely based on its diameter size and cannot be in any of those other protected categories. We will require an arborist report only for the pruning of a large diameter tree, and on occasion where the permit owner is requesting a hazard tree permit to remove a large diameter tree, we might require an arborist report to document conditions associated with that tree to ensure that the hazard of that tree meets the definitions contained in the bylaw. Under the section in the bylaw that speaks to the large diameter tree, a component of that bylaw talks about our target to try and achieve a 20% tree canopy for RS zone lands. And how this comes into play with the bylaw is that if a homeowner chooses to seek a permit to remove a large diameter tree, and then after removal of said large diameter tree, that owner still maintains a 20% tree canopy on their property, there would be no replacement trees required. The idea being, our research has led us to believe that 20% target on a residential zone lot is something readily achievable, and it's something that we should be hopefully doing and encouraging. So there's a tacit incentive in the bylaw for homeowners to try and manage their tree canopy accordingly to this 20% target. Replacement trees, when they are required for the removal of a large diameter tree, are either 3 new trees for 1 large diameter tree removed or 1 new tree for 1 tree removed. The difference being a smaller, generally 33-foot lot widths, we're only going to require a 1-to-1 replacement. Lots larger than generally a 33-foot width lot, the replacement requirement is a 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 replacement trees to 1 large diameter tree removed. The bylaw also introduced the environmental compensation fee, currently set at $595 per large diameter tree. So this is an option affordable to any owner wishing to remove a large diameter tree, which would see them pay the compensation fee into a special holding count in lieu of providing any replacement trees. So this was seen as a way that the district would build up an account that would be used solely for the replacement of trees back into the urban network. This slide typically shows a little bit of explanation around the urban or the large diameter tree. The slide on the left shows the large lot with some large diameter trees to be removed. The proposed tree removal would result in less than a 20% tree canopy remaining on that lot, so they would be required to provide tree replacement or pay the compensation fee. The lot on the right is again, it's a larger lot, but the area of tree removal associated with the large diameter tree leaves the lot with more than 20% canopy remaining. So there would be no replacement or compensation required on that property. And in the advent of our wonderful GIS and air photo technology with the tools we've got, staff can do most of these calculations are done on the desk using our air photos. So under our bylaw currently, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fee structure. So to prune and remove either a protected tree or a large diameter tree, that fee currently sits at $82 per tree. To prune or remove up to 4 protected trees, that $82 per tree rate is scaled up to 4. So 4 times 82. Once we have a permit application to remove 5 or more protected trees or large diameter trees, the permit fee is capped at $389. And so I'm going through this detail because there's some changes that we're going to propose around this fee structure. So the permit fee is the same to remove 5 protected trees or 25 protected trees. And while removing 5 large diameter trees on one property is fairly significant, it is not without precedent, and that will happen a few times a year. The environmental compensation fee currently sits at $595 per single large diameter tree. So when a homeowner wants to remove a large diameter tree and does not wish to provide any replacement trees, they can pay $595 that goes into a holding account. So what we're talking about now are some changes that staff have discussed and come up with in terms of what we can do to the bylaw that we feel might actually encourage the retention of some of these larger, more mature trees. So what we're talking about now is that we would create a new permit category and fee for large diameter tree removal. And so what we're asking council to consider tonight is that we consider an increase in the fee that applies just to the large diameter tree category that we would create. So in the previous slide, I talked about that $82 per tree fee. That's the fee that we're talking about now in terms of having maybe council consider an adjustment to that fee when a homeowner is seeking to remove a large diameter tree. The other thing we're asking for consideration of is to not cap that fee. I talked about how the fee was scaled up into including 4 trees at a rate of 4 times 82. And then once the number of removals exceeds 5 or more trees, the fee is fixed. So what we're asking council to maybe consider is that we do not cap the per tree fee removal for this new large diameter tree category. So what we could envision is a new fee is created per tree, and that fee would apply per tree. I see, Mayor, that there's some questions and hands up. I'm not sure how you wanted to handle that now or wait till after.
How many more slides do you have, Mr. Bose?
I have probably 4 or 5 more slides.
Okay, well, it's probably best to just do check-ins along the way then, especially if there's clarifying questions. Councillor Murray, just clarifying questions on this slide.
Sorry, I can wait until the end.
Okay.
I just thought we were getting closer because he was starting in on what he wants us to do. So I thought I just wanted to put up my hand in anticipation of the discussion.
Leave your hand up and we'll make sure
Okay.
he's done his presentation. Mr. Bose, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Mayor Little. So the next thing we want to do is we would like council to consider increasing the compensation fee that is paid when no replacement trees are taking place. We think increasing the compensation fee might discourage the rate of large diameter tree removal that we're currently seeing. And this increased fee will continue to fund other urban tree canopy renewal programs that are and will be designed to replace trees back onto private property. I'll talk a little bit about the newest program shortly. So the other thing we can consider is one of the staff and council have heard a lot of call or information from the public around the changes that are happening in our residential land use areas around what happens when so much mature tree canopy is lost through redevelopment. So one of the things that's within our purview would be to consider an alternative form of compensation for the removal of a large diameter tree. I believe everyone is generally aware of the kinds of important eco-services provided by a large and mature tree. It's particularly important to the district are the watershed health benefits in terms of the rainwater management features provided by a large conifer. And so this was an idea that had come up where council may ask staff to come back with more details around what an alternative compensation program might look like. On-lot green infrastructure is just an idea to seed discussion. The other thing we want to do is consider our security deposit formula. Right now, the security fee is set at $595 per large diameter tree, and that's for the replacement trees. The reason we're proposing a change in this security deposit formula is over the past number of years, we found an increasingly large number of parties that are defaulting on their security deposits. They go through a redevelopment process, they go through a tree permit process, and they build a new home or they do work on their property, and it comes time to plant their trees and they change their mind. They no longer want trees on their property. They then will write to us and basically default on their security, giving us permission to take that security and put it into the compensation account. That's happening fairly significantly over the last 10-year period. I briefly mentioned this year, I'm very pleased to report an incredibly well-received initiative we call the Urban Tree Canopy Program. So this Urban Tree Canopy Program will provide to residents of property in the district 2 free trees that they can choose from a list, and they can plant them on their private property. This year was the first year of the program where we invited residents to contact ourselves, register in the program, pick a tree, discuss with staff the benefits of certain trees. And I'm very pleased and proud to announce that this year's program delivered 239 native trees to 146 different properties within the district of North Van. And the species list here includes a summary of all the different kinds of native tree species that homeowners selected from the program and planted on their tree. So we're very excited about this program. We think there's going to be growing interest. This tree program is funded entirely from the Large Diameter Compensation Fund. So there was no extra money or anything that went to this program. This program was funded all from the compensation fees associated with the large diameter permit category. So here's just a couple of quick quotes around the project. We had help from our streets group, as you can see here, and the fire department showed up to help deliver trees and help homeowners load the trees into their various vehicles. The link in blue is the link to the page on our website that speaks to the program, talks about the registration process and some of the rationale behind it. So the other thing that we want to put on the table for council consideration is our hazard tree permit and replacement program. And there is no denying that climate and pests have impacted our forest health and will continue to do so. Dead or dying trees pose a very significant liability and risk to both the district as an organization as well as our residents. And these risks, as identified through our discussions with our forest consultant, include a risk in an increase or change in fuel types that are related to wildfire risk. Structural tree failures present hazards to residents, both in our urban network, but also in our recreational lands and associated properties in our natural parks. there is a increased risk of land and debris flow instability as impacted trees begin to lose their structural and root stability over time. Bruce Blackwell predicts this in 7 to 10 years associated with trees that have been dramatically impacted by the heat dome from last year and the current looper infestation. Now, these issues are not just associated with private property. The district faces these issues on all of our own land. And there are important ecosystem services are lost when hazard trees are removed. And currently staff spend a fairly significant amount of time reviewing permits, delivering permits for the removal of hazard trees, and there are no fees or replanting associated with permits issued for hazard tree replacement. So given the health of the compensation fund, we thought it would be interesting to hear council's thoughts around a hazard tree grant program where staff could provide ideas and details on the kind of property in which a homeowner might qualify for a grant to assist with hazard tree mitigation. Now, the reason for doing a grant is the program would be voluntary. A homeowner would choose to be involved in this program entirely on their own volition, but in choosing to take part in a program such as this, the district would then provide a grant that would assist with the sometimes very significant costs associated with removing a large hazard tree on a property, but then staff could, in return for program participation, require replanting of trees back on the property. We could also provide certain types of trees to go back on the property, again, provided through funds available in the compensation program. So this was a fairly innovative idea. It's based on the model of the urban tree canopy program, where we were soliciting participation from property owners who wanted to participate voluntarily. So this is a similar program, and it would be a program that would generate replacement trees in exchange for staff time presented with the permitting issue and all of that. So the benefits to this program, as I kind of mentioned, we would be ensuring fire smart and climate resilient tree species could go back on private property, especially properties that are either adjacent to or part of our interface fire areas. That might be an idea in which we would target first round participation, would be for properties associated with our wildfire development permit area. This kind of a program would assist with higher risk fuel removal from private property, which currently we don't do unless there's a brand new house build and there's a wildfire development permit area. So this is a program that would assist our community wildfire protection plan with fuel removal on private property. Replacement trees can be added to our future program inventory, in which we plan to do longer range monitoring. Replacement trees would be identified as protected under the tree protection bylaw. They are currently. And then again, as mentioned, staff are no longer providing a service that is taking place at a loss. This is, I believe, my last slide, Council. I want to appreciate you bearing with me. We had a question where a homeowner might seek to solicit approval to plant trees on district boulevards. We do get these requests. While infrequent, they do come in, and the requests are screened by Parks and Engineering and Development Services. We do this to ensure that there may be an existing street tree collage or guidelines already established for this neighborhood. We want to make sure consistency is there. Excuse me. And the other main issue is to ensure that boulevard tree planting doesn't come into conflict with planned or existing critical infrastructure. Overhead services, underground infrastructure, and utilities are often in boulevards. So that's the kind of, there's a fair bit of work that goes into whether or not to accept a new tree on a boulevard. As our fairly new construction bylaw came into play and our development servicing bylaw, there are new standards, wider driveway cuts, sidewalk standards, things like that, that also makes boulevard space less available for new trees. So there's a lot of work that needs to go in there. And then the other thing is Parks has a maintenance horticultural program in which they take on the significant task of nurturing a street tree. It's not simply a matter of planting it and forgetting it. Our horticultural department takes great care and pride in the maintenance of our already fairly extensive street tree list. So it is a matter of ensuring the appropriate resources are available when taking on new inventory. I do want to add that when council considers and approves a larger development, there is virtually always a street tree component program associated with that. So we're not abandoning the look of our street trees and our streetscape. This factor is taken into consideration on all of our larger projects and development permits. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Bose, for that presentation. I thought it was very informative. I guess just before I go to council, the main catalyst for many of these discussions, not all of them, is when somebody goes to build a brand new house and denudes the entire property of trees and then goes and builds the house. I take it from your presentation that when somebody is building a new house, they still have to count the trees on the property, and if they're not in the footprint of the house, then they could be still subject to protection or large diameter rules. But if they are within the footprint of the house, then that would be, they would have to be allowed to remove it in order to not affect the density of the property. Is that a fair assessment of it, Mr. Bose?
Yes, it is, Mayor Little.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Councillor Murray.
That was something that I wanted to clarify too. So I'm curious how many of those trees we're losing, because part of your presentation suggested that if we increase fees and compensation, maybe we will be able to protect more of those trees. So how many trees are actually coming out? I mean, the fees are, you know, the fee structure certainly has not kept up with the kind of, you know, when we're talking about redevelopment of lots, the fee structure has not kept up with the value of the construction, clearly. I mean, you know, they're just so incredibly low for really valuing what we're losing. And even if we get residents, property owners to replant, I mean, pulling out a 100, 200 foot cedar that's been there forever, how do you replace that? You know, if they even stay. So do you have any data on how many are coming out and how many we think we can actually protect with increased fees and compensation?
Your Worship, Councillor Murray, I could dig up the number of large diameter trees being removed probably on a yearly basis. It is difficult, but by the nature of our permitting system, because when it doesn't specifically define, it says permit trees being removed. So we'd have to dig into it to decide, to find out if these were protected trees because they were on the slope or in a streamside area, or if they were large diameter, but we could dig it up. So I'll made a note and I'll look into that. The idea around is there is a number of homeowners are just choosing to remove large diameter trees because of the current fee structure. I can't tell you how many we think we would deter if we change the fee structure. I do feel that it would result in fewer large diameter trees being removed. And, that was the intention of some of the changes that we've discussed are what could we do right now that would guide us in the direction where we're looking to go.
Is there an ability for us to incentivize the property owner or the contractor in some way to, I know planning's not interested in going into the discussion of reducing or including the size of basements in the zoning bylaw, which I think should have been, reviewed years ago. The size of some of these basements are the size of a house. And I think that house over on Cardinal Crescent, when I asked the question, how big's the basement or how many basements do you actually have? The overall square footage of that house was close to 9,000 square feet. The part that we counted was 4,500. And I think that's a very telling, discussion that we had that evening. But I think that is, that is part of this problem. And 10 years ago, we had, in every week because, the Upper Capilano, the whole canopy was being removed. So are we able at all to legislate or to, under legislation, allow incentives to contractors? Like, you think about apart from reducing the size of the basement, to protect some of these trees, because this canopy is so critical. And I just see the canopy. We've been reducing the canopy ourselves as the District of North Vancouver, the fire hall site, clear cut, the Cove. We're looking at another green belt for consideration for a housing project. So can you answer that question? Are we allowed to incentivize?
I'm gonna go, Mr. Stewart has his hand up. I'm gonna go to Mr. Stewart for a response first.
Yeah, Your Worship, I just have to take exception to the comment that this is a planning issue and planning directed. This is a policy issue that council provides direction to, and I just want to make that really clear. Council can do whatever they want, subject to the legislation, but it's not a planning directed derivative. We have a very, very robust environmental department, and they're doing great work, but it's not. I just want to reiterate: if council wishes to go in this direction, they can do so, but it's not a planning department decision.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
I guess I did point that out because we have been talking about, the loss of canopy throughout neighborhoods for many years. And the solution, I think would be to include the size of basements in the overall zoning. And although we've had numerous workshops on it, it hasn't really resulted in tearing apart that sort of initiative. So that's why it's been a frustration of mine. But can we put in incentives to try to protect these trees, Mr. Bose?
Mr. Bose.
Mayor Little, Councillor Murray, the answer is yes. And there are already numerous examples, both in British Columbia, Canada, and across the border, where local governments have put programs in place that provide a homeowner. I would encourage council to, if council is of the mind to direct staff to look into this, our recommendation would be that we would want to work with the owner of the property as opposed to temporary type owners like contractors or developers, things like that. The idea being the purpose is to build a long-term relationship with the owner of that tree such that the owner of that property receives the longer-term benefit of whatever incentive programs council might choose to have us implement. We developed the Urban Tree Canopy program with just that idea in mind, in that we will be rolling out a very innovative and scientific GIS monitoring program where a homeowner will upload their tree that they were given, and eventually they'll be able to provide monitoring pictures periodically to us of that tree to prove it's growing and it's thriving and doing well. And then the idea being that if we can keep tabs or keep virtual tabs on this tree, maybe at a later date, that tree might actually qualify for some kind of incentive. So yes, staff would be able to look into and come back to council with all kinds of different options around what an incentive program might look like to encourage an homeowner to actually try and retain more trees on a developing property.
And my last question on this round is, how much do we have in the tree account?
The environmental compensation tree account currently has over $200,000 in it.
Thank you.
That's a lot of trees. Councillor Bond. Oh, sorry. I'm very sorry, Councillor Bond. Councillor Hanson actually had his hand in the queue first. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Bose, and the report and the PowerPoint presentation. I mean, as I understand the idea put forward is that, at least in this report, we can preserve trees and have more of these beautiful large trees in our community protected with larger fees by creating larger permit fees and fees associated with their removal. I guess a concern that I have, and hearkening back to the mayor's opening comment, I mean, what initiated this discussion is seeing these lots of trees clear cut, denuded. And I don't see anything here that creates prohibitions on the removal of those kind of trees. You just pay a price. And I appreciate that the fees under discussion are low and are needing updating. But I don't believe that those fees, even if they're increased significantly, are necessarily going to dissuade certain categories of homeowners from clear cutting their properties, because they'll just be perceived as being a cost of creating the home. I mean, these homes are so expensive that some thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars in fee permitting, large tree removal fees, essentially, I don't think are going to be a barrier. I'd like to see a proposal, and I appreciate the confines of the Local Government Act that provide that we can't, in effect, stand in the way of land use through tree policy. But it seems to me that we could find incentives or a means of approaching it that have more teeth, that we could provide, that while you are able to build within certain density, you have to do so in a way that accommodates the trees. I don't think we necessarily have to concede the point that we will allow the trees to be taken down for a fee, which, as I see it, is really the nature of this bylaw proposal. And on the topic of incentives too, there may be, and as Councillor Murray was discussing, there may be ways of creating incentives that cause a homeowner to want to preserve some of these large and beautiful trees because it gives them some zoning advantages. So that's something that we could contemplate as well. From my point of view, in terms of the evil to be corrected, which is the wholesale destruction of some of our beautiful private treed lots in the name of building a certain style of home, I don't see necessarily these bylaw changes as necessarily accomplishing that goal. So I'm not sure that it may dissuade some people if it costs more, but I don't think it's necessarily going to change the behavior in some of the circumstances which are the trigger for the discussion from my point of view. So I'll leave it at that, except to say on the discrete point of the hazardous trees, I would support a program of providing incentives to encourage hazardous tree removal, because that obviously, from my point of view, has various safety and other benefits to our community. Good, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Perhaps just following up on Councillor Hansen's comments, and just to be clear, if a property owner, given our existing tree bylaw or the changes proposed, if a property owner does want to remove a protected tree or a large diameter tree, there is no legal means for the district to stop them from moving that tree. Is that correct?
Your worship, Councillor Bond, there's a subtle difference in that the bylaw specifically states that staff will not withhold a tree permit for a large diameter tree. But for example, if a homeowner has a tree that's in a streamside protection area, and that tree might be presenting issues as in nuisance or light or other issues to the property, we can withhold a permit to remove that tree. And so that there is a subtle difference around that, given the two types of categories of protected tree.
And the recourse for the property owner, should staff withhold a permit, would be to come before council and have that issue decided upon at a council meeting?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's important to understand the difference between the large diameter trees and staff's authority to withhold the permits versus the protected trees, and what I guess recourses property owners have in that case. I'm wondering, we're talking about incentives for the district and the district abilities. What tools would private property owners have at protecting their own trees on their lot? You know, I think a lot of, as we've said, the cause or the impetus for this workshop and these bylaw proposals is the clear cutting of large lots, historically treed lots across the district for new large homes. Now, if a person that owned a older home that was heavily treed wanted to protect those trees at the time of sale, is there ways for that owner to do so through legal covenant or other legal means?
Your worship, Councillor Bond, yes. And again, you know, they're rare, but there have been instances where a homeowner has undertaken to put a restrictive covenant on their property prior to putting it up for sale, thereby protecting a certain portion of their property. And you raise a good point, because there's a very important difference between why our development permit areas are successful in terms of protecting certain ecological and sensitive areas, and that is the provision of setbacks. When we have a development permit area, whether it's even slope hazard, streamside or creek hazard, a portion of the property has been deemed sensitive enough that that area is precluded from development activity or construction activity. And when we do that through our development permit areas, we have a much stronger ability to both legally require protection of these areas, but also physically we can promote protection of these trees better because they're not subject to adjacent construction impacts. We can identify a line and say, here's the setback line. There's no disturbance of no root excavation or anything that happens to this line. When we're talking about trees that are sitting on a single family lot, for example, that isn't offered any kind of policy protection via development permit area, it becomes very, very difficult to protect even trees that are around the perimeter of the property, and that's because of this the zoning bylaw, the tree protection regulations, and what is required to safely retain a tree all kind of come into conflict, right? So it's important to note the difference there, in that when we provide a setback on a property, it's easier to protect those trees. When a property is subject to just the zoning bylaw, it's very difficult to protect any size tree. And this is why staff didn't want to put in discussion around the size of tree or things like that.
But Mr. Milburn wanting to give a response as well. Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanted to further add to the response to that question about private covenants being placed on a property owner's property that would impose a limitation on future owners related to the development of the property. A couple challenges from my perspective with that approach. One, it would typically only occur with a property owner who's selling maybe a portion of their property or an adjacent property, and they have some long-term interest in seeing the enforcement of that covenant occur, and they're willing to back that up. Because it's a private contractual relationship, they would essentially be the party that would enforce a breach to that covenant. It wouldn't be the district. That's a private agreement between those property owners. So that's an important limitation. And actually, we wouldn't be able to enforce that particular covenant if it's just between two private property owners, whether that comes in the form of a building scheme or covenant. And of course, the person who has the imposition of the covenant on them can apply to the courts to have it removed. So there is that mechanism as well. So I just thought I'd provide that additional context because the question was raised. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Councillor Bond.
Maybe just to follow up on that, Mr. Milburn, is there any examples of private landowners issuing covenants to the benefit of the district in such circumstances, or in the benefit of the municipality, where then the municipality would then be the, I guess, the benefactor of the covenant and be responsible for monitoring and enforcing any breaches to that covenant? Mr. Milburn.
A property owner can try to name the district as a benefiting party. In that way, the district would have to become aware. However, we wouldn't normally recommend that. And the reason being is we might not, council might not have directed the resources and so on to enforce private covenants. They can get quite convoluted and complex in court. And so that's why we typically rely on regulations through zoning, development permit area guidelines, et cetera, because we have the capacity, the resources and knowledge to enforce those types of rules. And of course, they can't so easily be overturned by the courts as covenants are. They have specific limitations in that way. They're also difficult to enforce if, for example, someone who holds a covenant becomes aware of a breach. They actually have a statute of limitations sort of duty to enforce that issue. And if they fail to within that time period, it essentially nullifies the covenant potentially. Whereas that kind of constraint does not apply to zoning regulations, for example, or development guidelines. They continue in perpetuity despite awareness of the breach. And so allows for ongoing enforcement action, even many years down the road. So a lot of detail there, but essentially they aren't a perfect tool. We do certainly use them in very specific circumstances, and we enforce them. But we typically wouldn't encourage becoming enjoined in private arrangements. It would embroil us in conflicts that would be inappropriate potentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And I know that there's a reason why we took 5 years to discuss this issue the last time. It becomes very complex very quickly. Mr. Bose, just before we carry on, because I think it's going to inform some of the other aspects of the discussion, can you talk about the penalties for removal of an unpermitted tree? Unpermitted, protected, unpermitted, hazard, unpermitted on public property, perhaps, just to frame it, because we were hearing these numbers of $595 a tree. What is that compared to if someone doesn't get the permit and just goes ahead and removes the tree?
Your Worship, currently the penalties are if you say, for example, limb or prune or top a protected tree or a large diameter protected tree, that fine is $500. And if you remove a protected tree or a large diameter protected tree, i.e. cut it down at the base, that fine is a $1,000 fine.
Okay. And removal of an unprotected tree is obviously there's no permit required, so it's $0. Yeah. And removal of a riparian area protected tree may be more complex with different penalties and loss. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's a correct statement, Mayor Little. So a protected tree is a tree that's in a slope and a stream, in a covenant, a district-owned tree. So removing a protected tree is $1,000 fine.
Regardless of the conditions under which it's protected.
Correct. And so the district has another option, and it's actually something that we're going to bring forward. Is the tree bylaw has a provision where, at the recommendation of staff, we can seek a maximum penalty of $10,000 for a very egregious unauthorized incident. And I might want to point out, my understanding is the province has just made a policy change that allows a council to seek a maximum penalty of up to $50,000 now for a significant or egregious breach of one of its environmental related bylaws.
Mr. Milburn,
How many fines have we given out?
Hold on. I've got Mr. Milburn. You have a response?
Thank you, Worship. Just to add to that, the $500 and $1,000 fine are, I believe, and Mr. Bose can correct me if I'm wrong, the maximum permitted under the Act, and those are for municipal ticket informations or bylaw notices, have those limits under the Act. What Mr. Bose was referring to in terms of the increase from 10,000 to 50,000 is the prosecution through the courts, through the Supreme Court of British Columbia, the issuance of a long form information, and quite a costly, lengthy process. And that's why Mr. Bose mentions an egregious example, that we'd certainly use that kind of approach on significant examples. And we've seen some success of adjacent neighboring municipalities that have had some success in courts, seeing those kinds of fines imposed by the courts. So I just thought I'd add that for the context.
And Metro Vancouver Parks as well. Next speaker I have is Councillor Back.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Mr. Bose, for the presentation tonight. I guess to some degree will echo the comments of the mayor as well as Councillors Hanson and Bond as far as the issue. It really is the removal of these large diameter trees that are kind of being used or seen as a cost of building or doing business with regards to new houses being constructed in the scale and style of house that's being constructed on single family lots now in the district. And I understand that we're trying to balance out, someone's property rights with the protection of trees in the community. I tend to favor the idea of incentives, as Councillor Murray first pointed out. I'm wondering if staff, like we do with so many things, look across the region at other municipalities and other tree bylaws. And Mr. Bose, I wonder if you could comment on any other municipalities that may be somewhat comparable to ours and what success they're having with their tree bylaws, if we're gaining any ideas from that.
Mayor Little, Councillor Back. So it's a unique situation in that, to my knowledge, we're still the only municipality that has a tree protection bylaw that regulates trees on private property. So it's going to be hard to find a comparison. But for example, the city of Victoria, to my understanding, has a private property tree incentive program. And they use an online kind of GIS tool in which a homeowner registers with them and promotes the tree. And so the incentive, again, if council chooses to provide direction, we would look at models where a certain kind of formula would be developed where there's some kind of financial incentive is one way. The other kind of incentive would be to offer a homeowner seeking some kind of development project on their property, some kind of relaxation to some kind of zoning regulation in exchange for, say, preserving a grove of trees on, a portion of their private property. So, a much more complex issue. But to my current knowledge, it is possible. So those would be the two kinds of models that if council directed us, we would look into.
Well, thank you very much. And that's something that I would be interested in exploring. And I think I'm glad you pointed out the fact that we are maybe the only municipality that regulates trees on private property in the way we do. And it's nice that we are a leader in that regard, but we can always do better, as we're hearing from residents who are seeing these lots being, leveled. So I'm glad that we're talking about this tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Councillor Curran.
Thank you, staff, for that excellent presentation. I'm wondering if there is anywhere in any of our policies, Mayor Little, maybe you can chime in on the library board, that we can require the reading of braiding sweetgrass and finding the mother tree for everyone, just everyone in the district. Because I actually think I just wanted to honor the trees that we're talking about, because I think that there's the reason that we're having this meeting is because people do feel such a connection to the trees. And as staff pointed out, they do provide all of these other benefits to us. So I think I am curious from staff. My first question is around education. It seems like I'm wondering when in the process we even start to talk about trees, at what point in the process, because we're in a climate and ecological emergency. We've declared that in the district. So my first question is when do we start to talk to people about trees in the development process specifically? And would there be opportunities, or we can report back on opportunities to do that? Because I just wanted to really compliment staff on that innovative urban tree canopy program and the amazing feedback and that human interaction that people were probably craving, but to be able to connect people through trees and then to be able to track it. Because I think one of my large concerns too is that replacement trees oftentimes are not the right tree in the right location. They're not cared for, and it's not actually contributing to our larger goals. So I guess my first question is around the education piece. What value does staff see in that, and at what point do we intervene, and are there other opportunities to educate and or require reading? Probably the required reading might be hard, but.
Mr. Bose.
Mayor Little, Councillor Curran. So in terms of development and construction activity, our interaction with our customers takes place literally at the very first stage of official contact with the district. So in the case of a property that has any development permit area on it, district environmental sustainability staff are the very first staff group that work with that owner with a detailed survey of the property. So all development permit areas and conditions and tree retention is worked out with the homeowner before they even apply for a building permit. That's projects involving a development permit area. Our building permit process has a Q&A process that staff undertake with a prospective applicant, in which they disclose their conditions around trees and tree retention at the very early onset of the property. So, it's not a matter of resources or lack of trying. It's simply too challenging to retain so many trees on a property undergoing redevelopment. So, we're working with the homeowners from the outset. So we're creating an environment where the right trees are protected for the right reasons and safely. And that's a big, important part that the district has to consider when we do work with an owner to retain trees, right, around private property. The next thing is in terms of general outreach. I'm pleased to sort of announce that with the new climate office and with our new parks manager, our three groups have already undertaken discussions around broadening our outreach effort around things like green infrastructure, natural assets, and ecosystem services. And again, trees are the ultimate green infrastructure asset. So they benefit everyone. So we're already in discussions around how we might expand our outreach around speaking to the importance of green infrastructure like that. The Urban Tree Canopy Project was a great venue to begin that discussion and build on it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that connection is great. And there is a lot of appetite around learning more about the value and the relationship that we should have with nature and with trees. I'm wondering about, I know we had talked in 2019, I was checking back through my notes about LIDAR, and I know there's challenges with how we measure the amount of trees that we have, but more importantly, the type and the health of them. And so we have also talked about a baseline of ecosystem health, which I would view as part of a larger biodiversity strategy. I think that's a bit beyond the specific items that we're discussing, but I guess just in the context of trees being part of a broader ecosystem, so habitat fragmentation and all of the things that go into it. It's not just a tree, it's how it's connected to other systems. So I don't know if staff could speak to, like, if we were to say today, do we have a good understanding of the health of our urban tree canopy as we define it, both, and is it different if it's on private versus public property, that understanding?
Mayor Litter, Councillor Curran, we have a very good understanding of the health of the fabric of our urban tree canopy, because what's going on with our urban tree canopy is not any different than what's happening in the forests around us. Many of the same issues are experienced by homeowners on private property as well. So we are very familiar with the fate and the health prognosis of our forests. But again, managing the quantitative analysis of our tree canopy in the urban setting is, as you and I have talked about, my feeling is it's a very tricky and complex calculation to make. And I would like to initially sort of wait until a much more accurate and easier to perform methodology comes forward. But I feel our real importance is on especially the rainwater management features that these trees provide for us. And I'm encouraged when I'm looking, council will be receiving hopefully the draft ISMP report shortly, and there will be lots of recommendations in that report around programs, ideas, and projects in which we can begin to understand and help to mitigate the effective impervious area of our urban areas, right? And that's really what we're needing now is this rainwater management feature that's going to help see us through some of the changes that are coming.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that specific ecosystem, what the ecosystem provides in terms of flooding mitigation is really critical. And that will hopefully, echoing Councillor Murray's point, get into the single family zoning. I wondered if you would be able to briefly just talk on the effect of deep basements on hydrology and root systems, because I do think that that's relevant, even though it's more tied to zoning.
Well, it's not just the basements. And if council is interested, I've got probably 2 or 3 research papers that really look into this. The data that we've got has shown that when our typical early story single family home for, between 75 and 80 to 90 years old, when that property redevelops, it can again generally go from 25 to 35% impervious up to 75, 85% impervious. And that's really the one of the issues that we're being challenged with is all of those new developments result in a loss of tree canopy on many of these projects. So it's kind of like it's a double whammy, so to speak, where we're losing the mature tree cover that intercepts and stores rainwater, but at the same time, we're replacing it with almost double the impervious surface coverage on our lots. So all of this is having an impact on our stormwater infrastructure. And it is a challenge. And our engineering and building staff are working tirelessly around how are we trying to keep unnecessary water out of our stormwater network. And it's a big problem. It's going to challenge us going forward. And it's one of the primary focuses of the district's coming ISMP report that, again, as I mentioned, staff or council will be seeing hopefully fairly soon, is how do we manage this impervious surface area on our single family land use where we don't currently have much regulation.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of my questions, was permeable versus impermeable, and it sounds like that's going to come forward. I think that just speaks to the broader issue of, and maybe there are changes. I don't know if there's anything in the works about what we are able to regulate through policy, because now we don't have a lot of tools when it comes to how much, managing. I don't believe we do. Maybe we will more with the integrated stormwater management plan that's forthcoming. But I think how much water is managed on site, other ways to improve biodiversity, because I think one thing that I would like is more of a long-term vision and goal for where we're going as we change our relationship with the land over time and accommodate more folks in different neighborhoods. It's going to happen. Human development is part of our society. And so I think rather than having it be Groundhog's Day, where every single time something comes forward, it's like the same conversation, having a broader long-term, very long-term strategy for what we do, and then some indicators to be able to monitor how are we doing. So when something comes before us, we have a lot more evidence and data to support what we're doing on that and how we're mitigating other things like biodiversity, which can be improved through green roofs, green infrastructure can manage water, etc. So I think it's that 21st century planning that's all needs to happen. But I do support this and more. Generally speaking, I think the education piece is really critical. And I'm excited. I'm on the climate committee, and I know there's going to probably be some great work there. So I'll pass it off to someone else to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. Next speaker I have is Councillor Murian.
I think Councillor Forbes she hasn't spoken. I can wait.
Okay, Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Richard. It's a really good report. When I brought this forward and asked for this kind of thing to be done in June, it was driven by what I think Councillor Hanson has said. It was driven because we were seeing single-family lots being totally wiped out, no trees of any kind left. It was also driven by a particular home up in sort of Upper Capilano, and there was a very, very large tree that was on the far corner of the lot, and it was an older house that was quite a ways back from that corner. But subsequently, they took the larger tree down, and it was huge. It was beautiful, and it was just right on the property line. And they took it down. And then very shortly thereafter, the house is being torn down and something's being built. So it was a combination of when a developer comes in and does it, or a single family homeowner comes in and just clears the trees out. If I understand you correctly, I think I'm also going to say the same thing as Councillor Hanson, that these proposals that you brought up here aren't going to, unless it's in a protected area or it's a protected tree, being on a slope or a watershed or the other areas that we cover, there isn't really any definite way to stop that kind of thing, if I understand this correctly. And the problem with the Capilano Road, there were a couple lots on Capilano Road that this happened to, and $595 is just a cost of doing business to them. It's a drop in the bucket. So I really reinforce what you brought forward tonight. I like the idea of the fines going up, the permits going up. It may not solve all our problems or the problems I was trying to come to, but I think Councillor Murray's idea of incentive might help. But I think the fines and the permits have to go up because it's just a cost of doing business. If somebody loses $595, it's when you're spending maybe, $5 or $6 or $7 or $800,000 to build something or more. It's not very much of a deterrent. I also like you mentioned the permit fees for the large diameter and not to cap removal as you have. I like that idea too. I also like the idea of raising that deposit so people will be less tempted to just default on the deposit and let you keep whatever we've already got. So I guess basically what I'm saying is I like everything you brought forward. I don't think without some other ideas like incentives or things, I don't think it's going to solve the problem that I was originally trying to address. I do have a couple of questions. When we ask them for replacement trees, do we have a set size or like height of tree that we ask for, or does that vary depending on what got taken out or where the new tree can be planted?
Mr. Bose?
Your Worship, Councillor Forbes, we will require a like-for-like replacement. So if there is a large fir or cedar tree that comes out, we will require at least one of those going back in. In terms of the pot size or diameter size, what we found is there is no specific rigid criteria. We found that generally a 1.8 meter tall conifer tree is the most cost efficient and hardy species to replant. And you need to keep in mind, the bigger the tree you buy from the nursery, the risk of survival goes exponentially down because of the transplantation shock. So we found that these 1.8 meter high trees generally are the best. They're the best sort of combination of price and hardiness. And then for the vine maples and other sort of smaller deciduous type trees, we'll generally go with what we call a 1 gallon pot.
Okay, thank you.
They're generally very small trees.
Okay, thank you. I do think that Councillor Murray's that we should be looking at basements because I think that's really important. And also, we don't have, and I would also like us to look at, and this isn't specifically your department, this would be back into the building department as well, but we don't have any rules. I've asked about this before, about the percentage of side yard or percentage of backyard that can be a non-permeable surface. And we have no regulations on that. We have regulations for a front yard only. So I also think if we looked at those regulations, we might be able to ensure that a certain percentage of a backyard has to remain permeable. I happen to know of a yard that's basically the person asphalted their entire backyard practically. So, and there's no regulations against that. I also wanted to ask one other question.
We've gone over time, so I'm just going to rotate onto another speaker. So I have had the timer up during the night. We can come back to you. Just pointing out that at one of our past council workshops, we had a councillor speak for more than 12 minutes in a row, and some other councillors expressed concern that was too much. And so I've put the timer back up. It's on for 4 minutes minus the time that staff are putting forward for their responses. We'll go on to the next speaker. Now at the end, we'll obviously come back to additional time speakers, but at this point, I think we're going to try this out for a little bit. So the next speaker I have is Councillor Murray, and then I put myself in the list, followed by Councillor Curran. So Councillor Murray.
Can we expand the development permit areas?
Mr. Bose?
Mayor Little, Councillor Murray, I believe the answer is yes. There would be, it's an OCP amendment that would be required and all of that due process, of which I'm sure Mr. Milburn would be able to provide more details on.
So I mean, I think it's something that we have to come back for another workshop, but we've got to look at expanding the development permit areas because the world is just not the same as it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. When we're going from 20 to 75% impervious surfaces, we are losing our tree canopy. We've got future predictions of considerable loss within the tree canopy based on the looper moth, based on heat domes, based on all sorts of considerations. These trees, as we...
Can I pause you just for... So Mr. Milburn has a response to your first question before we go on to another one. Mr. Milburn?
I just wanted to know if we could, and the answer is yes. So I don't need to have another, I think this is something that we need to come back with.
Can you hold on for just a second? Mr. Bose made a statement. Mr. Milburn wanted to add to the statement. It may be to clarify the response by Mr. Bose, and so it's important to go to the director on this. Mr. Milburn, can you clarify around our ability to use development permit areas to manage private property trees? Mr. Milburn.
Yes, the answer is yes, as Mr. Bose mentioned, with an amendment to the official community plan, which requires, of course, engagement, consultation with the community as directed by council. The other point I would make is the nature of these environmental protection development permit areas are such that you can't simply blanket the entire environment with the development permit area. It has to be specific to the natural features. So council would have to define, through a process in conversation with the community, advice from staff, what are the particular features council is looking to protect, and then an amendment to the schedule of the official community plan would enable that to occur. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Councillor Mary.
Well, luckily, as we live on the side of a mountain, we have lots of natural features, including the mountain, multiple streams and creeks, and very sensitive ecosystems, floodplains, wildlife corridors. So there's an extensive list of those features that I think would fall under the legislation of the Local Government Act. I think the replacement of these trees, it takes decades for them to actually, I think you spoke about 1-to-1. It may be the same kind of tree, but it's not the same kind of tree because it's going to take forever for it to grow up to do the work that it does right now. I think the tree canopy program is great, but I'm sure there's, I'm sure that we can get out more people in the community for consideration of taking us up on this. Is the tree canopy program funded by the tree account? And how do we trigger that money to be spent?
Mr. Bose?
Your Worship, Councillor Murray, in 2012, when council adopted the current version of the tree bylaw, we created a very special account under our accounting system that requires very specific direction and approval from a GM level or above. The account can only be used to purchase trees. It can't be used for other, consulting fees or anything. It can only be used for purchasing of trees that go back onto a district-approved project. Specifically,
and how much have we spent? Like how many of those senior management approvals have been done?
We have the purchase for this year's urban tree canopy program was about $7,000. Is that an average per year, 7,000? That was probably our highest expense. We have not found the right kinds of projects up until the urban tree canopy program in which to invest the money in trees that go back on private property where the need is.
Okay, so we if we're collecting this money to be able to plant, we should be creating the opportunities to actually do that. And I'd like to understand what the impediments of us planting those trees are. We've taken down so many trees. Would a good example be at the fire hall, the new fire hall down on Dollarton? Will we be extensively planting that site? Because I have to say I was a little shocked when it was cut. So many trees came down. I thought we kept that buffer in the rear, but I thought it was going to be much more than that. Are we going to be replanting there? Down on Naughton, for instance, would we be replanting there?
Worship
Councillor Mary, I think the question is, can we use the fund collected from private property to do tree replacement on public property, including our own projects like the fire hall? Is that correct? Mr. Bose, you have a response to that?
Yes. So the answer is that those projects have their own standalone procedure that sees that the project managers use their own budget and their own planning that includes tree replacement. The compensation fund is designed to put trees back on private property where they're being lost. So I'm hearing that there is some interest in which council might direct staff to look at some incentives around providing homeowners to encourage them to keep more trees. That could be a venue in which the compensation fund could conceivably be used. Councillor Murray's question is very astute. The fund has been growing because there's been more large diameter trees coming out. There have been people defaulting on their security deposits, and we're finding it harder and harder to get programs to put trees back on private property.
Okay, so I think we need to amend that policy and change it so we just plant trees, because we're collecting more money than we are spending on purchasing trees and planting them. And we should really be taking advantage of that money and planting as soon as we can in order to give those trees the ability to grow up and replace the canopy that we're losing, not keep the money in the bank and hope we come up with a suitable project. So obviously we need to be, homeowners or contractors or whoever don't care about the money being defaulted because it's only $600. So that if it was 10 grand, they would care. But we should be taking that money and just planting trees wherever we can. We've got lots of areas. We've got more land than anyone, and we've got areas that need trees. We certainly have taken out a considerable amount in Kate's Park. The maple trees, tons of them have come down. And why wouldn't we be planting down there? So let's just amend that policy so that money that they default on can go back into planting trees, private or publicly. So my other two questions would be, how do we review the heritage trees? Is it the same heritage trees that we've always had? Do we add to the list? And the protection, we've got a large amount of green belt areas, areas that are connected to the alpine, areas that have some old growth in them that still are not protected areas in the district. They need to be protected. They still have existing zoning on some of them, and we need to, I understood Ms. Rogers was going to be bringing forward some areas for us to consider increased protection of, and now Ms. Rogers has retired, so I would like to ask Parks to bring forward that list that she was working on, so council consider further protection of these treed places of our community, because we just are simply losing too much too quickly, and we really have no idea what the future will bring us.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Sorry, Mr. Bose, did you have a response to that?
Mayor Little, Councillor Murray, so the heritage tree designation process remains the same. After the last addition to the heritage tree list, a number of years ago, a tree was added in Pemberton Heights, I believe. Staff produced a metric sheet that basically guides anyone who's considering promoting a tree to heritage tree protection status. The tree needs to meet certain physical characteristics. Once staff reviews that and agrees the tree is of worthy nature, then an application is made for council consideration. Then council would, on resolution, add a new tree to the schedule of heritage trees appended to the tree protection bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Bose. I have a couple questions myself. Mr. Bose, can we stop the commercial sale of timber from after it's been removed on a private property in the district of North Vancouver?
No, we cannot.
Okay, so an 80-foot tall Douglas fir, I worked in forestry, I was for 19 years. And so an 80-foot tall Douglas fir that's about, that would be qualify as sort of a minimal large diameter tree under ours, is worth about $3,000, minus your cost to get it to market. And so, if somebody is removing large diameter D firs, hemlocks are cheaper, cedars, depends on the breed of cedar, but if you're removing D fir, it's about $3,000 for an 80-foot tree once you get it to market. And so that's what you're up against with these fees. You're seeing people who, because of our fee structure, see the cost. They can either just cut it down unpermitted for $1,000, or they can pretend like they intend to do a tree replacement program, pay $595, and then walk away and not actually do that, and then only pay the $595. But the reality is they can turn around and sell some of those mature trees in the thousands of dollars. And so it really is a cost of doing business calculation for somebody who's looking at a lot that is a mature treed lot in the district of North Vancouver. So I'm not too worried about the financial numbers back and forth on this, whether they're a disincentive or not. What I'm really focused on this issue is one that I don't know why it's not the first issue out of the gate. And that is that if you believe in climate change, if you believe that our community is going to face more intense droughts, more intense weather events, then you have to come to the conclusion that inevitably we will have a significant wildfire on the North Shore, in the North Shore forests. And it's probably coming in our lifetimes, probably coming in the next generation. And when you consider that, then you have to consider what are the ways to combat that and stop it. And the biggest risk to having a forest fire is an intermix fire, where you have a fire in a house that spreads into a forest. The biggest risk to life and limb in a forest fire is where it's intermixed, where it transfers from a forest into a residential neighborhood. And here we are taking great painful steps to protect trees in that intermix area, where they are the highest risk trees in the district of North Vancouver for causing loss of life and causing loss of property. But even more significantly in this context, the loss of huge swaths of forest. And we don't seem to address this issue from that wildfire response perspective. And I'm just shocked that we don't. I mean, if we were having this discussion in the third week of August, maybe we would. But our community needs to be prepared for the eventuality of a massive wildfire. And that includes preparing fire breaks so that we can defend a fire one way or the other. We can fight a fire at a house and stop it from spreading into the forest, or we can fight a fire in the forest and stop it from spreading to our housing supply. Like, it just, I don't know why. We don't have a shortage of trees in the district of North Vancouver. We have 6 to 7 million trees in the district. And when you see one forest fire go up, the amount of single trees on private property that you've gone through great expense to be able to save, that one wildfire will wipe it out 1,000-fold in terms of the content of lumber consumed in the fire and the carbon re-released back into the atmosphere. I find this discussion very frustrating. I think that the district has very little place directing this hazard issue on private property next to people's houses. And if we were in several other jurisdictions in Canada, the height of the tree would determine whether it was a hazard tree. If it's an 80-foot tall tree and it's within 80 feet of a structure, then it would be considered a hazard tree because it can be a part of an intermix fire. So I find this all very frustrating as somebody who came from the forest industry. I think that we are missing the much, much bigger picture on this issue. The next speaker that I have is Councillor Kern.
How do you feel, Mayor Little? I'm unclear. I think the point around science and evidence is really important, and so we do need to better understand the relationship between sinking carbon and having the benefits that trees provide, both in terms of mitigating climate change, adapting to climate change, and mental health benefits, right? Like there's a lot involved here, right? So I think that we need to have better information to be able to make those really informed decisions, especially over time. So I think that it's starting to emerge where we're seeing more modeling scenarios where it's like, if this happened and then that happened. And so we just have more information to make these decisions, because I think that point is an important one, and I also agree that it's still 2021, so anything's possible, but hopefully the forest doesn't burn this year. But I do think that staff coming back, with some more information as that ties into our climate change adaptation strategy and as it ties into how the land is going to change over time would be really helpful for us to make good long-term decisions. I did have a question about in terms of, I think Metro Vancouver has the 40% urban canopy strategy to 2050. And I'm not sure if they're using LIDAR, but I know that there's different ways to measure. And depending on, I've seen lots of reports that people do them different ways and get much different results. So can staff report on how Metro Vancouver is measuring the urban tree canopy, and if that would, how we would see how we're doing in that regard?
Your Worship, Councillor Kern, absolutely, we can do some research on that for you.
Thanks. And then just this would be probably another research question, but just so that we can understand the percentage of our urban tree canopy, because that's what we're discussing, that is on public property versus private property. I think that would be really helpful for us to have a broader picture of that understanding, because there is more that we can do. I read a report that in Seattle, they were using the example that 500,000 free parking spaces could be over 1 million trees that could be planted. And so there are options that both improve permeability, improve human health, that achieve other goals that we have. So I think that would be helpful to understand. And then the last question is on the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative and that baseline health that we have talked about. Is that something that staff is pursuing, or I know it's been talked about a bit, or pending direction, or what is on that front?
I know I'm attending a meeting with that district project team coming up. I'm not leading that particular initiative, but I can get back to council with more information on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that has informed other municipalities in terms of an actual, I have a real ethical problem with putting a commodity of value onto nature, because I don't think that you can value nature in those terms, but I also recognize that that is a value that would potentially lead to change here. So if we were able to apply the true ecosystem services, as they're called, to tree removal, in terms of flood water management and all of the things, the prices would start to change so drastically that it would actually change the system. So I think that that is still, it's not understood, right? Like we remove something and we don't realize what the cumulative and long-term impact is of that. So the more that we have long-term cumulative information to make decisions here at council, I think the better. So yeah, I think those cover my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kern. Next speaker I have is Councillor Bond.
Thanks, Mayor. We'll have a few more questions about the, I guess, the incentive programs that are proposed to property owners. And it's kind of flowing out of this discussion where we're hearing that we have somewhat limited tools in order to enforce tree retention on private owners. Are there any risks associated with a grant program to a property owner to plant and maintain trees should that property owner then sell the property the next year? Like how can we measure the effectiveness of a program over the long term, given the challenges with private property rights that we're discussing right now? There's no, I'm assuming there's no way that should we grant $1,000 to a property owner 1 year, that 2 years from now, a future property owner could say, well, I no longer want these trees on my property, and have the trees removed, or is there?
Your Worship, Councillor Bond, it's one of the complexities that we would have to look into, with our legal team and with other sort of policy specialist around how might we encourage this. But it's not unlike anything that we're not already doing. Mr. Melbourne mentioned the problems we have with the probably hundreds of covenants that are in the district's favor on private property that are protecting trees. They are hidden away in backyards. They don't come to our attention. They're very difficult to enforce and all of that. So, there would be a bit of a soft program in terms of how hard we would do it. And this is why we wanted the urban tree canopy program there's a registration requirement. And eventually we'll get photos of the tree in its location. And ideally we would keep that going over a certain time. But the other thing is that we can offer protection under the current tree bylaw. If an owner is provided with a replacement tree as part of a program, replacement trees are defined as a protected tree under the tree protection bylaw. So again, what we're trying to do is when we create a registration program where a homeowner registers, they provide their contact info, they provide a picture of the tree, it is a replacement tree. We can do mail outs and information packages. Hey, you were a participant in the urban tree program 3 years ago. We hope your Western red cedar is doing well, and keep in mind it's a protected tree. So we can consider all of that kind of outreach in combination with these programs. So, but it's a good question, and probably the primary question we'd have to really look into before really coming back with a robust program for council consideration.
Thanks for that answer. I think following up on some of Councillor Kerman's comments and maybe Mayor Lowell's comments, I think the question about the percentage of trees that are on public property and private property is an important one and can help frame our response. As well as we move forward in a changing climate, and I'm sure Mr. Bose, you're on top of this, the types of species of trees that we select and recommend, like maybe it's not a Western red cedar anymore, maybe it's a different type of tree that's more hardy in drier or more extreme conditions. But I think, hearing the challenges and the incentive structures, I think that if we are going to be promoting a more healthy and holistic tree canopy across the district, it might fall more on our own lands, whether it's in streets and boulevards or further environmental enhancement in areas, district-owned lands, whether that's in the Alpine area or in parkland. As those systems change due to the climate, investing in those areas to retain a lot of those ecosystem benefits, I think we want to look at that as part of a more holistic approach to managing the tree canopy and all of its associated benefits. So I think that's all my questions and comments.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Next speaker is Councillor Murray.
I think, just in regards to property owners planting trees and then removing them or having them planted when a new house is built, for instance, as a spec house that a contractor is building and then selling. It's the ability for us to, enforce those commitments that are made at the time when the permits are given out. And we have ourselves I don't know how many times Mr. Joyce and Engineering and Parks has planted a row of trees on the side of the Seymour River Bridge, only to see them die the next year and die the next year and die the next year. They keep dying. I think there's a lot of properties in the municipality, and some are in, very sort of natural areas. Some are not. And those are very sloped, steep properties on escarpments that hold a significant amount of trees that actually keep the banks up. But those are on private lands in many cases. And how we deal with those property owners, is something that we really need to look into. And it's a significant amount of work. I mean, the Pemberton Escarpment, for instance, is a very significant area with lots that run down the bank. And those lots come down to an active trail in an urban area. And so managing those trees is a challenge. I mean, the amount of resources that Mr. Bose and his team needs, and certainly, the increase in personnel in regards to parks and our climate department is important, but there's a lot of work. And, these very large areas in our community that has been, the reason we are who we are, need resources. These trees are not just about, it's not just about rights on these trees, whether it's a private property owner or ourselves as a local government. They do a significant job. And, they hold up. I mean, we're watching what's happening, with the climate in regards to these weather systems that are coming in, and the town of Merritt, how the logging has just increased and increased and increased over the years. And how is that logging now impacting that community, and the inability for those ridge lines to be able to hold themselves up because of the loss of tree canopies. So we're in a very, very different world, and we need to be able to respond to it. It cannot just be business as usual. And I think we need to accelerate the type of work. Mayor Little, your comments in regards to wildfires, I mean, certainly we were all waiting to see if last year it wasn't going to be our turn. And I think it's important to note that the province took the position that we would have the full resources of the provincial government in regards to protecting, the lands of the North Shore. But do we have the amount of resources we actually need to fight a wildfire in the urban setting in the Lower Mainland, especially when there's 10 or 100 or 1,000 in the interior, and we see that every single year. We are just faced with so many challenges at the moment. And, I don't see us pivoting. I see us just continuing to move forward as we've always done and hope that we can all handle it. And with what's happened in the last week in the Fraser Valley, I don't think we can handle it. I mean, I was talking to engineering, and I said, if I had told you that next year we were going to lose the Coquihalla Highway in 5 places and the Lower Mainland was going to be cut off, what would you say? And they said, we would never believe it. We'll believe it. And we're at the beginning of the rainy season. We're beginning of the winter. I just don't think we are actually ready for what is coming at us. And, I just hope we don't regret the direction that we're going in and some of the decisions we're making. I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about, our province, all local government. We can't fight Mother Nature anymore. We can't, we're engineering, can we actually engineer ourselves out of this? I don't think so. So I think there's a lot more to this discussion than, as much as I'm grateful for the tree canopy program. I think we got a lot of stuff that we've got to manage and have some really hard discussions about, and make sure that the direction that we're going is actually the correct one.
Thank you, Councillor Murray, Councillor Forbes. And if we are drawing to a close on council comments, I'd love to be able to create an opportunity for the public to share their concerns as well following that. So Councillor Forbes, your comments?
I have an observation here of a chart that was put out by Metro Vancouver in 2014, included all of the metro areas, and the District of North Vancouver in 2014 had a 47% canopy coverage, urban canopy cover in the urban containment boundary. So 20% seems to me that we're aiming low if we had that much back then. There were only about 6 or 7 communities that had under 20% at that time. And the average coverage at that time for all of metro areas was roughly 32%. So I'd be really interested. The District of North Vancouver was the 5th down from the top. Of course, the top was Village of Lions Bay. So I'd be interested, Richard, if you have anything more up to date than this 2014, because if we're aiming or targeting for 20 and we had 47 7 years ago, then we've lost an awful lot. If you could provide maybe any kind of more update chart or graph like that, I'd really be interested in it.
Mr. Bose?
Absolutely. Your Worship, Councillor Forbes, I'll happily provide some more information, but it's important to consider the context of the Metro study. And it's one of the reasons why I've tended to stay away from quantitative analysis of this nature. The district's numbers were dramatically skewed by the large number of our natural parks that are within the urban containment boundary.
Okay.
The 20% canopy number that's mentioned in the tree bylaw is specific to a single family zoned property. If we could strive to have every single family zoned property achieve a 20% tree canopy coverage, when you factor that into our urban parkland and how many trees we have along the streets and others, we would be setting ourselves well. So that's the important difference in that. But I will endeavor to look up and get some more details on the Metro study for all of council.
Thank you. That was a very important clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I don't see any other hands from council. I do see a member of public wishing to speak. If we can transfer Mr. Teban over as a panelist, that'd be great. Peter Teban, can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, just so you're aware, Your Worship, the process of promoting one to a panelist takes long. Where I just saw you and just got audio again when you said, "Do you hear me?" It takes that long. Just so you're aware.
That was the first time I asked for it. We're getting pretty close to the time. But you're right. We can transfer over panelists earlier as long as I give cues to staff that I intend to move over to public. Your comments, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to, throughout my comments, just keep these two words in mind, please. Unintended consequences. You all got an email I sent you earlier today that highlighted a multifamily property that had a significant number of trees on it before it was redeveloped starting in 2018, including trees that, for what I can tell, were on district property, yet they were all clear cut down. Including the retaining wall that presumably the district built with taxpayer funds. So the first comment I have is this: I don't understand how you have expectations of single family homes that you don't place on multifamily. I think 20% canopy coverage is a great target. It should apply to everything equally. And if you can't achieve 20% on a multifamily, then you should be providing CACs to provide parkland. Because how can you put the burden of a healthy natural environment only on the backs of single family homeowners, especially given the bigger context where Metro Vancouver is saying what we foresee by 2050, 1 in 5 properties in Metro Vancouver will be single family. So I don't know how you square that. I really don't see how anybody can see that as reasonable, to put the burden solely on one group of people. Understand this, when it comes to unintended consequences, that for many single family homeowners, the takeaway from everything that we've heard tonight is this: the District of North Vancouver is watching you on satellite, and don't ever let a tree get big enough that the district has control over your business, and don't ever plant a protected tree. That's going to be the takeaway. Because every other possibility means that municipal staff is in your business on your own property, in your own backyard. That's a pretty daunting takeaway. The other thing I think you need to consider. Now, Mayor Little, you talked about fire interface takeaway. I had the assessment done this summer. I'm happy to share it with you. To give you an idea, and I have a fairly modern house built of very safe materials. It says that the range is from 0 to 50 points, 50 points being high risk. My house, 262 points. The first thing that Chad Laforêt, the captain of your own fire and rescue services, recommended was removing the hedge that runs parallel to my fence. So I really think it would be a lot of fun in the court case where my insurance company was fighting me to pay out the loss of my home and the jump of the fire from my home to the interface to say, gee, I would have liked to mitigate the risk, but the fees and fines from the District of North Vancouver forbade me from doing so. You know, you got to take all this stuff and put it in the bigger picture. Are we about fire risk mitigation, or are we about 20% canopy? And the last thing I'll say is this. I really think you need to work with people to understand what truly is an incentive. To threaten somebody with a punishment and then not apply it is not an incentive. If you really wanted to get into the zone of incentives, say, hey, we have a program where we're going to put in some sort of break for you, some sort of financial incentives if you achieve over 20% canopy coverage on your property. And if you're over 20%, guess what? We will never complain about what you do. You just stay above that 20% and we're going to love you. That would be an incentive. Right now, all I'm hearing is any way I step, if I get a tree over 10 centimeters, if I get a protected tree, I'm going to have staff in my business. My whole being is about having government out of my business. So I don't see many incentives so far. But I don't mind the idea of 20% coverage. I mean, I like trees, but they're becoming weaponized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teven. And of course, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's easier to achieve 20% coverage on larger lots, which means wealthier community members have a much easier time to produce that than people that have a 33-foot lot, as an example. And so that's always one of the challenges, is balancing the equity piece in it as well. Mr. Bose, you have a response?
Thank you, Mayor Little. I wanted to point out that, yes, a multifamily development has far less room to sort of harbor a large and mature conifer tree on it. But I think council and the community needs to be aware of that when council approves a large type of development through development permit, those new projects in terms of, say, rainwater management, which is one of our most important pressing factors when we are facing the uncertainty of climate change, these new multifamily developments are far exceeding their share of rainwater management with all of the new modern detention and technology that is applied. And the district is doing our part that when we approve a development like such, we are doing so knowing that they are incorporating the very latest in stormwater and rainwater management features on that property that far exceed anything that we could hope to imagine on a single family property when it comes to storing and detaining rainwater that falls on that property. So it is important to recommend that while we're losing aesthetics maybe and biodiversity associated with large mature trees, we are doing quite a good job on other factors in regards to services that mature trees provide.
Thank you, Mr. Bose. Okay, Council, I see no further speakers on the matter. The purpose of the report was to provide background information on the tree protection policy, and we've done that. We've had a good discussion. The matter will now be returned to, Mr. Palacio, you wanted to comment? Yes. Oh, come on up. Sorry, we have another member of the public wishing to speak who's in council chambers here.
Hello, Your Worship, members of council. Just about two things that came up. One of them was the cost of business and how somebody could still profit after like cutting their tree and trespassing all the bylaws. Could we just raise the fines up to whatever the maximum limit is? I don't know how complicated that it is or how that could be, but if we do just put a humongous fine, then maybe people won't go through it. I don't know if you can put a $10,000 fine on cutting down a tree and things like that, but maybe that is the only way to stop it. Maybe that's when the cost of business is too high for them to cut down the tree. And the other thing was about the urban canopy project. If it's going really well, why do we need to limit it to 2 trees? I don't know how many trees fit in a person's backyard, but maybe just not limit it. And if somebody wants to put 5 trees and we have the funds for it, then just allow people to put tons of trees in the backyard. Thank you
very much. As I said earlier on, it's a very complicated matter. Sorry, Mr. Bose, you have a response?
So I wanted to just thank the resident for taking the time to come down. That's wonderful. For council's information, the fees associated with our bylaw are currently the very highest we can make them under provincial authority. We cannot make our fines any more higher. We can change the bylaw to increase the maximum penalty that we could seek through use of the courts from $10,000 up to $50,000. And staff will be putting that in our report when we come back. And again, the resident obviously knew a little bit about the urban tree canopy project. We limited it to 2 trees per owner this year in our inaugural year to gauge interest on the tree. We were worried about certain owners coming in and saying, I want, you know, a dozen trees, and then finding out they're now wholesaling trees off their backyard to their neighbors and things like that. So it is something we're looking to expand. And if we feel a property can accommodate more than 2 trees, and if we can find a way, we'll happily accommodate them.
Thank you very much. As I said, it's a very complicated matter and something that I think all members of council hold the forested character of our community very dearly, and I'm sure the vast majority of our community values it very highly. I know every time I'm driving through our community or going out for a walk, I'm looking at the trees, and you know, whether it's I live on the Parkway and it's that sort of forested green corridor characteristic, or even just when you come over the Second Narrows Bridge and you come down and just see the green laid out before you. It really is an important character piece for our community. And I'm glad to hear that we already have region-leading regulations in this regard. And we're all going to be thoughtfully considering this matter going forward. We've completed the purpose of the workshop tonight. And so I'll thank everybody for participating, but if somebody would please move adjournment, I will accept.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Back, I will accept. Thank you all so much for your participation tonight.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.